Mr. Speaker, my list of concerns with H.R. 4775 are many. But one of the main issues I have with this legislation is that it will permanently weaken the Clean Air Act, as well as future air pollution health standards for all criteria pollutants. In fact, Mr. Speaker, in addition to delaying scientifically based health standards and harming the public interest, this bill may also have unintended consequences for the very same industries that the majority is trying to help. If enacted, this bill may actually slow down the issuance of pre-construction contracts, increase regulatory uncertainty, lead to additional lawsuits, and shift the burden of pollution control from new resources to existing ones, potentially hurting small businesses. Mr. Speaker, Section 3D requires the EPA to issue rules and guidance for implementing a new or revised national ambient air quality standards, quote, concurrently, end of quote, when issuing the new standards. Otherwise, under this legislation, expanding facilities will only have to comply with the outdated standards, allowing some facilities to pollute more than their fair share. This bill, Mr. Speaker, will also unfairly shift the burden and the cost of cleaning up pollution to existing facilities and would only serve to slow down the pre-construction permitting process. My amendment, Mr. Speaker, seeks to address many of the problems that may result from this bill, both intentionally and unintentionally. The Rush Amendment would strike the sections exempting pre-construction permit applications from complying with new or revised national ambient air quality standards if guidelines are not published concurrently with those regulations. Specifically, the amendment simply states that Section 3D shall not apply with respect to review and disposition of a pre-construction permit application by a federal, state, local, or tribal permitting authority if such authority determines that the application for such subparagraph is likely to 1. Increase air pollution that harms human health and the environment, slow issuance of final pre-construction permits, increase regulatory uncertainty, foster additional litigation, shift the burden of pollution control from new resources to existing sources of pollution, including small business, or increase the overall cost of achieving the new or revised national ambient air quality standards in the applicable area. Mr. Speaker, the new standard that the EPA recently issued already represents a measured approach that seeks to balance both public health impacts as well as the rule's overall cost benefit, even though this is not a requirement of the Clean Air Act. On the other hand, Mr. Speaker, H.R. 4775 represents the exact opposite of a measured approach, as it seeks to tip the scales in favor of industry over public health. Mr. Speaker, this amendment will help to prevent some of the adverse consequences of this bill from going into effect, whether they be intended or unintended, and I urge all my colleagues to support it. I yield back the balance of my time.